welcome everybody. We'll make a start. Really pleasure to welcome David May from the just up the road, our best new friends, Royal Agricultural University. I think the crux of this is that David's doing a lot of work around animal welfare, and that's really central to some of the work, or neighbours really neatly with some of the work that we do in CCRI. And we have a common friend in the Health and Harmony Command paper that DEFRA announced, discussing about how we respond to this new central interest and policy around animal welfare. David, usual score, we'll talk for sort of half an hour and then hopefully have a chance for discussion.
Brilliant, thanks for everything. Am I okay staying sitting? Is that alright? This seems more relaxed. Is that right? Okay, so yes, I just need to give a little bit of background on myself before I talk about this subject. I'm a vet. I've been working at the University of Bristol for 25 years, a very long time. And the reason why I was working there was because it is an international centre of excellence in animal welfare, and that's been my bread and butter, the technical area, shall we say. But actually what I'm going to talk about, although the context is animal welfare, it is more general principles I really want to discuss with you folks today. Maybe it's a bit of a pompous title, I don't know. But it's a question that I have. I'm an applied scientist. I want to make a difference in the area I work in. And there is a tension in all scientific disciplines to spend a bit of time, shall we say, admiring the problem from lots of different angles. But actually what you want to get on is get on and solve the issue, as it were. And I constantly struggle with that dilemma of have we admired the problem enough to understand the problem enough to get on with it. So these are views from me. I trained as a vet, and so you can't really undo that training. So I have that training there, but also I suppose I really am a policy practitioner as much as I get involved in a lot of policy discussions, and that's policy to me is definitely not just government policy. It is definitely government, industry and civil society, and certainly in the animal welfare area it's those combination of those three, more recently actually civil society and industry, less so government, although more recently they're showing an interest, which is great again. And I see there's been real policy changes, so I've been involved in those debates. And definitely an optimist. You have to be an optimist in these areas, otherwise you give up and go home, because it is far too complex. So you have to be an absolute optimist in this area. Okay. So what I want to talk about is trot through some of the previous projects that I've been involved with, some things that worked, some things that haven't worked, just to give you a bit of the flavour of the things I've done. I wanted to link back with REU properties, how REU sees itself, and how that, particularly how then it collaborates with you guys, because we do see the collaboration between REU and CCRI as very, very important to what REU does and hopefully what we do as well. So it's a real, as I said, an optimistic and positive message, I'm hoping. So, a little bit of context of what I've done previously, and why it's relevant to knowledge exchange, and how not to do it as well. So I'm going to go through these projects, these examples of things that we've done in a little bit more detail. I'm going to start off with the original mantra that I had started on when I wanted to do animal welfare, make a difference, etc. The context was coming as a vet, you get trained stuff with lots of information and advice. And surely the key is we need to integrate the knowledge of the disease process, for example, the knowledge of farm-specific diagnosis, along with your knowledge of the husbandry risks, farm-specific risks, put this in this magical husbandry advisory tool, come up with suggested control measures to control things like lameness in dairy cattle, tail biting in pigs, and juris-pecking in hens. Happy days, come up with amazing advice. You advise, you tell, whatever it is, farmers what to do. Funnily enough, it doesn't work. The social science, explaining that was available at the time, but we as vets didn't read it, didn't know about it, and we secured funding on the back of this, a lot of funding. The lameness and dairy cattle one was £600,000 from the Tubby Charitable Trust. Tail biting in pigs was £250,000 from BPEX. Injurious pecking in hens, again, similar size project from the Tubby Charitable Trust. Over those projects we get a little bit more sophisticated about it, but fundamentally it was the knowledge solution. If you get knowledge in the right format, and we were a bit clever about knowledge in the right format, because there was a technical job to do to integrate the different complex technical advice into a simple message, and so actually that bit of the process still needed to be done, but we didn't have the sophistication about how to interact. Because the mantra is, in vet school, still is I'm afraid, is that you've got problems, there's technical solutions, you go out and give advice and farmers will do it. And that model works when the farmer knows he's got a problem and he wants to solve it, and he's coming to the vet with a specific question, please can you help solve this? The vet as an advisor integrates all that technical information, comes up with the best advisory plan, prioritise, etc., and the farmer will do it if they have recognised a problem. Happy days. But it doesn't work on problems where the farmer hasn't perceived the problem, it's not prioritised high enough, there isn't the business incentive to change, etc., even though actually there are strong cases, business cases to make that case. For whatever reason, if that fundamental motivation isn't there, it doesn't work. But we did show in all those studies that there was a relationship between those farmers that did take the advice and the outcome. So in other words, when some did, when farmers did take that advice, it did work. So technically it showed it worked, but the problem was in people, funnily enough. That was which is no surprise to you, I know, but it was a surprise to us at the time, because we weren't in the same field as you, weren't reading the same material, etc. So then we got a bit more sophisticated, I would say, in the Healthy Fit project. The first lameness project we did was with actually focus on lameness in heifers, and it was funded by government. The next project we did was funded by Tubby Charitable Trust, and the further on stages it were, and a few things we got a bit better. Crucially, we worked more collaboratively with the industry, so the organisations involved in here. We had a meaningful project advisory group that these organisations were definitely inputting ideas to what we did. And in the end of the day, it did give some change on quite a number of farms, but actually the main benefit it did, it resulted in a research project, Healthy Feed Project, and it became a national intervention initiative called the Healthy Feed Programme, now run by HDB Dairy. And actually that was, I would say, was the main outcome of this. It demonstrated to policy folks that actually you could improve lameness and you could, farmers were engaged in it. When we started it, there wasn't much interest at all. But what we did in this project, we pinched ideas from others, and so for example, some of the basic things we did, we worked with psychologist Liz Paul, and we tried to look at the motivations for change, and actually a thing that came out very strongly was that actually farmers are motivated. Why are farmers motivated to control lameness? It's about pride in a healthy herd. They talk in a positive language and they want their animals to do well. They don't talk in the negatives of lame animals. They talk about, I've got a healthy herd, I'm proud of my herd, and that was the thing that they rallied around. And to us this was a bit of a lightning bolt moment, because all our language has been in the negative previously. So we changed in our mobility scoring, even the word mobility score. Before it was a lameness score and it became a mobility score. The language was, instead of percentage of lame cows, we changed into these cows are likely to benefit from treatment. And in fact that phrase came from, I was sitting down in the office of the farm manager at the University of Bristol Farm, and I was trying to persuade him to be interested in this. And I was doing the usual telling thing, it didn't work, blah, blah, blah. And eventually the light bulb happened to him, he says, "Oh, David, what you're telling me is this list of cows here, these are the ones that are likely to benefit from treatment." Yes, that's exactly what I was saying. What did I think of that? No, he thought of that. That was his phrase, and we use that phrase. It's now embedded into the National Intervention Programme, because from a very practical point of view, that list of cows, he wasn't interested in the fact that it was 25 out of 100 or whatever it might be. That was not what was interesting. He wanted to know the identity of the cows that he could do something about, and that was the phrase that we used. So again, when you say it afterwards, it's a statement of really obvious. But at the time, it was a revelation, just a change in that language from the negative to the positive. The other thing which we did, we pinched some ideas from social marketing, and we integrated that. There's been previous literature around social marketing, which is usually in the environmental area, trying to encourage communities to change, and it was about selling ideas of change. And the tactics that was used in this approach we adopted in the Healthy Vic project. So facilitation is a very important thing. The most fundamental need to that is about their idea. That's fundamental. But also when you talk to farmers, it's about understanding what the benefits and barriers are to that husbandry change. Just really understanding what those benefits and barriers are is really fundamental. So our Lamus project team spent a lot of time talking about what the particular barriers are to Lamus change, and practicing the language around it, and then practicing the phrases of language that would be a benefit. So the language of how you use that was fundamental. Norms, they're more likely to change than the others are the same. Trying to do some sort of commitment, we did that by recording, and then farmers recording what action points they were planning on doing, and then prompting and reminding them to do it after a certain period. And we found that this positive strategy worked. In our experience, the farmers responded to it well, and it was a useful approach. Quite expensive in terms of manpower to communicate these things, but it did work. The next project I want to talk about, sort of moving on the journey, is the Ashorewell project, which was quite a large project working with farm insurance schemes. Our starting point was Freedom Food, now RSPCA Assured, and the Organic Soil Association scheme. But we got the timing right of this, because our goal was to try to encourage farm insurance assessors, rather than just to assess the facilities and resources that provided to the animals, to actually look at the outcomes, the health and welfare outcomes of the animals on the farm. And this was, again, a bit of an important mind shift in approach, because the point is, it's not the buildings that drive welfare, it's the management of the buildings that drive welfare, it's the day-to-day stockmanship skills, etc. They're very difficult to include in the farm insurance scheme, but if you have a system that assesses, records, rewards outcomes, then it should be more effective. And we got the timing right on this, because Red Tractor, although they weren't originally a project partner, they didn't receive any money, we got the timing right, that they were very, very interested, and so they've embedded the process into the National Dairy Scheme and the Pig Scheme, just because it was the right thing to do. So we were very fortunate on that. And that has resulted, certainly in the laying hen sector, we have evidence now, because basically all non-caged laying hen farms are assessed according to this protocol, where animals are assessed, and it's resulted in a reduction in feather loss, which is associated with injurious pecking in laying hens, which is a big problem. And key on this, as well as the data side, so assessing welfare, provide benchmarking information about welfare. Important for us was trying to encourage culture change, which I'm not sure we've exactly cracked, but it's a work in progress, is that in the assessors that do these farm insurance visits, although they're not allowed to give prescriptive advice or provide instruction on specific solutions, they're not allowed to do that to retain their independence, they are allowed to actively promote best practice. And so we spent a lot of time in trying to build guidance notes which allowed them to promote interest, provide technical guides, advocate the value of advice, explain the benefits of solving the problem, etc. So we that was, as I said, it's a work in progress because still a lot of those assessors have got to need to tick this off and it's not about behaviour change. But that's a common thing in many assurance schemes. What are you trying to do? Is it about continuous improvement, or are you supposed to try to do ticking thing off to demonstrate compliance? Really, it should be about continuous improvement, but that's a long-term cultural shift that needs to be brought about. As part of that, though, we were very keen on trying to understand from farmers how it was received. So we spent our crude questions: what are the farmers' perspectives on this welfare outcome assessment? We did, along with the partners, RSPCA, Soil Association and Red Tractor, do a mix of surveys, interviews, focus groups in different species, and a lot of technical stuff in that, of course, and that was definitely used. But also we had some important challenges. There was variable value to the farmers because they saw this as a top-down inspection process, and they didn't value that it was a value to the scheme. They only saw they were obviously more interested in their own benefit, their own farm. There was more fundamental. There was sometimes a conflict with their caring role. They didn't like this challenge of being assessed, evaluated. None of us do about what we do. And yeah, there was some specific disagreements about technicalities. Principle of consultation and review is important, but we need to do better at involving farmers during development and evaluation. We did try a lot, but again, we were still mostly dealing with the policy folks who were at a practice level. So I say this is a work in progress with the assurance stuff, because fundamentally it is a top-down process. It is the system saying you're okay to farm or not. So there's a cultural issue with this whole mentality. But having said that, I would still argue that the assurance bit is a very important part of the industry's assurance to its consumers, and fundamental and important for driving change too. But we have to understand its limitations. And now this is a more recent approach that we've taken. This is more on the one-to-one communication. So this is very much in the veterinary context. And we pinched the concepts of motivational interviewing, which has been developed by these folks, Bill Miller and Steve Rolnick. Steve Rolnick is actually based in Cardiff, Bill's based in America. They developed this communication style primarily in medical sciences to target issues of non-compliance. So this is about doctors trying to persuade their patients to have a healthier lifestyle, stop drinking, stop smoking, and these sorts of things. And the point, this is about eliciting behaviour change by helping clients explore and resolve ambivalence. And the key word is ambivalence. It doesn't work on people that have got no interest in changing. It's not that revolutionary approach, but it does work on those that know they should be having a healthy lifestyle, which on these sorts of issues, most people, on a human perspective, they want to improve their diet, they want to improve their exercise, etc. And the same with animal welfare. Most farmers, of course, want better animal welfare. So ambivalence is right, but they're conflicted because there's other things in their life or other issues going on. So it works without ambivalence. And there's a huge evidence base for this in the medical literature. Really, really strong evidence base for the effectiveness. And this has been rolled out in medical literature, in medical profession. There's training programs for these guys in many different facets of medicine. So we had an Animal Welfare Foundation project. Alison Bowles, the PhD student, she's still at Bristol, and she's a real, if you want anybody to talk on this subject, I would suggest involve Alison, she's fantastic. And basically, just to summarise the process a little bit, what it is trying to do is encourage arguments for change to become stronger and more persuasive. So the language you have in your one-to-one with your client, farmer, whoever it is first of all an engaging process, shall we work together, focusing on what to change, evoking why change, and then planning on how to change. And basically it's how you talk. And the MI training that's advocated in medical literature is a 2-day training, because it's actually quite a mindset approach, and it's quite tricky to do. It's really a very, I would say, skilled process that you can't do. I'll just give you some flavours of what it is about, you know what I mean. So, but doing it properly is quite a difficult thing. So, and it's more sophisticated communication skills. So, communication skills in the veterinary and in medical now have got very good actually in those professional courses, and they are. But primarily they're about making sure that the information exchange is good. It's about, has the patient understood what was said, and has the doctor listened to what the patient said. That is the primary purpose of communication skills. Whereas this is more sophisticated. This is actually trying to promote behaviour change. And so when you ask open-ended questions, of course, because that's part of communication skills, you invite the patient to consider how and why they might change. You also listen, of course you should listen, because that's what you should do. But the purpose is to understand the patient's experience, capture their account with reflective listening statements, such as quitting smoking feels beyond you at the moment. So the point about doing this empathy thing is not about just making it feel nice, it's about a tactic to deal with the resistance. So empathy is often advocated as a thing to avoid conflict. This empathy is about trying to deal with resistance. So it's a different mindset. And even when you inform, you ask permission to provide information. You never tell without asking permission for that. So sometimes, of course, you do need to tell. You do need to provide the advice in the veterinary sector. But you never do it without asking for permission. So the mantra which we try to advocate is never tell. Never tell. You just don't do that. It's really dangerous thing to do. So there's actually quite a few resources on this. If you're interested in this topic, plenty of stuff out there. B&J, for example, have got some nice articles about nutrition, nice online materials, and as I said, Alison's doing some really great stuff in the veterinary context. And this approach definitely applies in any advisory context. I just can't see how it doesn't. It's a really powerful approach. So that is, I'm more positive about those sort of tactics. You know, we've really learned, and they have a lot of traction in our audience. Another thing which I think is working really well is that we're working with farmers to generate both policy and action. So here's 2 particular projects where we genuinely are asking farmers about what positive welfare indicators should we use. This was a Scottish Government project. And we asked farmers about what are the policies that should be in place to reduce antimicrobial use. Now, just an example of how this one came about. This one came about because a retailer wanted their supply chain to have policy. They engaged a group of vets to develop a policy and write a policy. And so the idea of those vets was, right, we'll get around to write the stuff and we'll come up with a grand plan. But actually, luckily we intervened at the right stage. We said, whoa, hang on a sec, why don't we have farmers write it and suggest ideas, rather than have you as technical people to suggest ideas? And farmers did that, and they loved that. But what the key difference between what the vets would come up with and what the farmers would come up with is that the farmer's idea was much more proactive and positive and ambitious than the vets would have done if they'd come up on their own. Because vets their psychology is basically to deal with their most sceptical client. That's in their head. Whenever you're talking to them, that's what they're thinking about. They're thinking about Mr. Grumpy or Mr. Jones that's going to give them a headache about this. But actually, when you have a group of farmers, it's the loud positive ones, their voice comes out, and you get them coming through, and you don't get the views of the grumpy one. When we did this process, we did involve the vets, and the vets came to meetings, but we literally separated the vets. We said, thank you very much, vets, for coming. You go and talk to yourselves over there, and we'll talk to the farmers. And we got the views and ideas from the farmers, and there was a much more positive, engaged way to do it. So developing policy by farmers, much more effective. Of course they wanted technical input, but the point is they asked for the technical input, and then they received it, and that was a better way to do it, rather than starting with the technical input. And another project, which is the Stable Schools approach that's advocated by Metabast in Denmark. Lisa Morgan's got an HTB project where this is about farmers generating action. The previous one was about farmers generating policy. This is about how do we encourage farmers to develop their own specific action plans to reduce antimicrobial use. And this, again, works a treat. Vets were very uneasy about it because it was vets taking the lead about reducing medicines. But funnily enough, it was they were very keen on listening to other farmers. That's the fundamental point about it. Yes, they wanted technical input, but they got technical input when they asked for it. So that work's ongoing, but it's remarkable how much action has happened. And the last project I want to mention is the Innovation Project, which was a thematic network actually. Most thematic networks are the Horizon 2020 ones are really about collating and sharing evidence of best practice, examples of best practice. Whereas we deliberately wanted to actually have farmers generate ideas about what the technical solutions were. And so we had, we adopted things, Lisa Van Dijk, who's a PhD student, she's now at LRU, she brought principles from the developing countries, she's working equines, and we developed a supporting approach to groups of farmers, 19 networks we had, developing ideas, technical solutions for their problems. And we found that very effective, very rewarding. There's lots of materials available on this, and we have this innovation spiral, which is basically a no-brainer process to support innovation at a farm level. But we had, I think it's also quite useful to think about 2 levels of participatory approach. Yes, we were facilitating farmers to develop their technical solutions, so groups of farmers working on the project, but actually we had the groups of facilitators, we had them doing a parallel participatory process about developing the ideas. So actually we didn't know what we were going to do at the start of the project. We got away with writing the grant without doing too much detail, but actually, which is a legitimate problem. But then the facilitators developed this spiral, and there's a lot of criteria and helpful guidance. They helped each other do it. So we had 2 levels of participation that seemed to work very well. Statement of bringing obvious. This is nothing new. What goes around comes around. So the Farmer First, Robert James' book, 1980 something or other, has got it all in there, and he writes about 3 key steps to analyse, consider choices, experiment. Funnily enough, that's exactly what we're doing. And there's quite interesting words that he describes that process. So that people that are doing the analyser, so this facilitator is acting as a convener, a catalyst and advisor. When you're considering the choices about what farmers could do, the facilitator is acting as a searcher, a supplier, travelling. I mean, literally the logistics. Getting the food and water to the meetings is one of the most important tasks of the exercise. And then when they get to the experimental stage, you're acting as a supporter and consultant. So describing that facilitator role is very well described in that book, I think. But it's also what's interesting is, if you read that book, he argues that this is relevant for resource-poor production systems because simple and high input packages do not fit well with small scale complexity and diversity of their farm systems. So he's saying that the current, the technical fixes of throwing fertiliser and all this sort of thing, whatever it might be, that works in developed world, UK agriculture, doesn't work in resource poor systems because they're small scale and they're complex and they're diverse. The point is now, we have got huge levels of complexity. So the simple, why don't you just line doesn't work now because there's no why don't you just. Every single farm is different, is going to need different approaches. So I think the arguments that he was making about complexity is fundamental to what we need to do now, is that we need exactly the same approach to be able to deal with individual farmers, all these issues to in front of them. So, I've been working quite a bit, so I need to crack on a bit. But, so I just wanted a little bit word about complexity, because I think there's challenges can be simple, complicated and complex, and to me I use animal examples. So simple, solve something by vaccination. Complicated issue might be mastitis, because there's lots of disease issues going on, but actually at the end of the day you can understand it. Whereas a complex, something that I'm dealing with male derek cars, changes over time depending on how different policy actors play on it. It's really, really, you can't describe it. You describe a truth at one point and it changes the next, because a retailer said this, an NGO has said the other, and it changes over time. The point is, what support they need is you need a different type of person, and it's for the complex. I would argue you need a facilitator, and this is, I think, a summary of what a facilitator is. It's about collaboration, it's about professional facilitation, but that professional facilitator needs to be sufficiently curious to understand local complexity. They definitely need confidence to support an evidence-based innovation. So it's not saying not science, it's just saying you need the confidence to support science. And lastly, most fundamentally, they need to have humility to value all forms of expertise. And to me, that mantra of curiosity for complexity, confidence for evidence, and humility to recognise the value of others is what needs to be in the mindset of facilitators. But if you look at vets, traditional advisors, that's not in their mindset. That's not how they work. They think their status comes from their knowledge. Actually, the source of knowledge is not from them, the source of knowledge should be from the farmer. That's the shift. Okay, so I've been reading recently about can complexity science help us, so there's some ideas in these books, for example, so I won't dwell on them, but I think there are some things in here in complexity work to help. So just to finish off that bit, my reflections on the value of social science. Definitely applied scientists need social science. It's like you shouldn't really be doing science without statistics. You shouldn't really be doing work in the applied context without social scientists. It's just, you shouldn't do it. Don't do it. But I would say that over-admiring the problem can be a problem. I think there's a Vietnamese saying which talks about weighing the pig. Weighing the pig's important, weighing the pig's important. You've also got to feed the pig. You know what I mean? You've got to get on and do it. Collaboration, practice-led approach is very important. And there's also this more fundamentally, I would say all scientists, social scientists, natural scientists, veterinary scientists, wherever they go, they need to be on tap, not on top. I think that's a Winston Churchill quote, and that's very important too. Practice-led is fundamental here. They need to be there, supporting, and they can make it happen, but at the end of the day, the ideas and everything has to come from practice. And this complexity that I was doing my head in at the moment, and we need better rigour to be able to deal with it. And I'm willing to learn, I want to learn, because I need help with the complex stuff. So a little bit, that was sort of my views on social science and how it works and how it helps apply science, and whether that's helpful or not. But I want to now bring it back to what the REU is about. This is generally at a more global level, and particularly thinking about collaborations. So REU, what is REU? REU really, however you see it, sees itself as helping science, policy and practice integrate. That's where it sees itself as a useful part. Of course there's other organisations themselves that are in that space as well, but it's not, it's not never going to have a major research reputation, for example, so it's not that, but it has got this amazing network, and every meeting I go to, I am amazed by the network. It is genuinely, it's not just talk, it's real. We've got these common challenges, we've all got those, we understand those. So the opportunities I think are around these three areas around rural collaborative policy, rural innovation support and rural enterprise acceleration. I'll give you a bit of ideas. So this is a deliberate pitch to you guys to say, we're doing this, we need help with this, because this is what it's about. So rural collaborative policy, I'm going to give you an example of that on the animal welfare thing. It's a bit, again, maybe a bit pompous to say it's a new era of UK leadership, but it genuinely is. We've now, because government's come back to the table, amazingly, it's fantastic, it's incredible, that we now have got a genuine opportunity to have the collaboration of government, industry and civil society. But that collaboration, for example, is not reflected in the health and harm problem. you know, that is very much about what a government can do. It's not, but really, it doesn't really explain how it works. Civil society is hardly mentioned. It's not really integrated in there. And animal welfare, that's industry and civil society have been driving it. They're the ones that are delivering the world-leading standards, even though it's claimed 7 times they've never got world-leading standards. That's not because of government. You know, I mean, they've been involved in doing some legislation, you know, bits and bobs, but not really driving change on the ground. So, how can we help? We had a policy, and so Janet came actually on the workshop about developing a national strategy, and so the opportunity is can we bring these different groups together to focus on a common goal, and a common goal that people are rallying around is about animal welfare is great in the UK. Actually, we're not, but don't tell anybody that. I'm being completely honest with you, is because what you have to identify is the common goal, what people believe, and then you just sort of generally introduce, but actually have you looked at legislation in Scandinavia? You know what I mean? It's then you start to actually unpick the detail of what it actually is about. So we think what we can do is 3 things. Robustly review the evidence base for these claims, facilitate actually when these things need to be developed further, and also celebrate success. And how we're going to fund that and do that is work in progress. But again, I'm going to work with you guys about how to do that. But that's an example of rural collaborative policy. So also similar obvious thing that's really highlighting the health and harmony with what are the skills requirements for UK agriculture. Again, that's really common ground. And really, I particularly think the opportunities, as well as we've got this complex technical stuff about innovation and sort of side, we've got the soft skills stuff. This collaboration skills stuff is fundamental to UK farmers, whether they've got to collaborate at a local level to sort out the landscape issues, or whether it's marketing, or at a national level to sort out disease. Collaboration skills is something that could and should be explored. So the other area is rural innovation support. We want to do more practice-led innovation on the high-tech stuff. For example, REU is never going to be developing the intellectual property itself, but it can facilitate others to develop intellectual property in private farms and all those sorts of things. So that's really applying sort of innovation style support. So we definitely want to do that. And the last one, I'm not sure if anybody folks who've got involved in this area, but the other major strength that REU's got is about rural enterprise acceleration. It's a really, it's a bit of a flip to say, but the powerhouse thing is genuine. I think they've got students working on enterprise ideas, and they've got a lot of graduates and a lot of other people coming back in, and they're being really positively supported to develop innovative ideas. And there's a social science around this. The Edinburgh ECD conference, and I've forgotten the chap from Wagner, and was talking about how to make this work, and actually REU is doing a lot of this. So I think there's real important policy questions here about how to do it, but also a bit before about getting the entrepreneurs into this. You know, we need the bright young kids wanting to do business in the rural community. I mean, why not? You can. There's lots of opportunities. So the stuff they're supporting, you know, they've got insect farming, they've got solar farms, they've got, I'm going to forget what it is, but there's a portfolio of really live, vibrant small businesses, obviously food and drink sector, a lot going on there. So that's another area which definitely, I think there's real opportunities for collaboration with you guys on how to do it. So, to summarise, I'm optimistic, as you can tell. I always am, always will be. Particularly, I want to emphasise the value of peer-to-peer learning process science. I think it's fundamental. And these are the 3 major collaborative opportunities across the board, no matter what the topic is. I think there are plenty of opportunities in policy, innovation support, and enterprise acceleration. Okay, so I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much. Brilliant. Right, we have the ability for questions. Really, loads there. Do you want to kick off?
That resonates hugely with what we do, even in terms of the complexity ideas.
Yes.
And farmers having to deal with very complex issues and qualitative learning and so on. And we've been reviewing the innovative farmers, evaluating that.
Yeah.
But the question is really, how can you mainstream it? There seem to be all these little pockets, a lot of the time in research projects, of excellent participatory approaches, co-innovation, co-learning, with very innovative farmers and engaged farmers often.
Yeah.
But not a lot of evidence of any long-term diffusion from those pockets. So the question is, how do you kind of mainstream that approach, and how do you make it more effective in terms of diffusing further to those hard-to-reach farmers?
Yes, definitely. You know, that's an area we'd really like to collaborate on, and how to do it. I think there's some building blocks. I think that's the point. So one of the obvious building blocks is about the people to do it and the money to do it. So the people to do it, there needs to be a recognition and value for the facilitation role. And so we're following that policy workshop we did on this topic. We are keen on doing a facilitator forum, and I think we're getting a nice network now. So I think the plan is in September to organise that to get a bit of positivity about themselves. So this is a value, and then also training courses to do that. So that again can be interlinked with the catalyst we're working on anyway. So we need to make sure that works for that skill set for that facilitation. So that's the people side. And the money side, government need to value it and make it a generic pot available. So there are pockets where facilitation is available for public support, but they're topic specific. And the point about facilitation, it shouldn't be topic specific. It's a generic skill, and you go wherever the farms go. So that is the argument that needs to be made. It's about public support more generally, and of course they'll need assurances that the person who's doing it is competent, etc. But that generic money availability. But then you mentioned about the hard-to-reach farmers. Well, this is where the integration with the supply chain is fundamental, because we have seen huge difference. Our constant experience is you only get full engagement if you've got supply chain involved. In the Healthy Feed project, we had recruitment rates ranging from 10% to 100%. One of those groups was based on phoning them. One of those groups was based on the retailer telling you to, and it's not to work out which one is which. And that's the power. You need, but it's a positive thing, because basically you can say, here there's a group of farmers who are struggling with something. If you go here, there's a person here, there's money here, you can make it happen. And to me, that's the mainstreaming bit. It's the interaction of the people and the money and the drive from the industry. I'm afraid, you can't rely on people coming up to their own, coming in circles. You need some nudge into the system. So I think those are the main areas to mainstream. Completely doable, and not rocket science, to be honest.
I guess that relationship will therefore, it'll only work when you've got a direct link between people higher up the supply chain and the sorts of things you're looking at. So with welfare, you can see there's a direct link.
Yes.
Thinking in respect of maybe rural diversification or innovation. There's no supply chain. There's no obvious single pull factor.
Yes.
So changing mindsets becomes more of a kind of a local challenge. It might be that you work more through other types of local network to provide that.
But it's not, because I've never really worked in the environment area, but I'm intrigued to understand whether there is potential for more supply chain involvement in it. If environment is valuable to citizens, and the politicians are saying it is, then surely it's valuable to consumers, so it should be relevant to the market. But it's just because government has got involved, then the industry hasn't. Whereas I think there probably is an opportunity.
I think it's harder because it's less immediately visible as an aspect of product.
Okay.
So I was at the LEAF event a few weeks back talking about the effective LEAF mark. And that's an instance where there's a market niche for quality products that comes with an environmental branding.
Yes.
And then you get exactly what you just talked about, because people who want to supply certain supermarkets have to have the LEAF mark, so they have to go into that system. So automatically you've got that link with the supply chain. But in a lot of other areas, there's much less readiness on the part of the people higher up the supply chain to say this is an essential part of our brand. And in fact, I'm going to see the lady from the co-op that I met at the LEAF event, who's thinking about how can she nudge her suppliers to get more environmentally aware, and would the leaf mark work for them? And she wants me to go and sort of facilitate a session. So that they think about it, but I think they feel that it's one step removed, because it's about what's happening on the farm. It's not something that directly affects the thing the consumer buys. And there's a lot of research which is a bit discouraging in some ways about what people want and say they want generally, but then what they do when they make their decisions in purchasing. And there isn't so much follow through.
Well, of course, that does apply in the animal welfare area, but the hook for the animal welfare area is that it's the informed consumer that expects animal welfare to be sorted. So it's about tying into what the retailer, if they had a bunch of interested consumers here and they were exposed to what are the pollution implications of intensive dairy, they would, an M&S supplier might say, well, you should have sorted that. And then that's enough for M&S to sort it. So you don't need to worry about, and I'm actually not, I think the role of the consumer is often overrated, because it's actually just the expectation management of the retailers.
We have seen examples of it in respect of celebrated cases where people in the supply chain really make a change when they realise that otherwise WWF or somebody's going to make a lot of noise about it. So with Walker's crisps and potatoes ploughing up, virgin pasture and things. There have been a few examples, but I think it's still not fully embedded in.
They're not very good at broadcasting, are they? Because we did that work with Unilever and Bird's Eye Peas. They've got Tesco's. They've got very established protocols for their farmers, but they don't tell you about it.
No.
And that came about because of that collaboration with Forum for the Future, wasn't it? Is that the right?
Well, this is
Forest Lot and Bird's Eye, and they sort of initiated it at a kind of local level. But I don't think it ever travelled as far as being sort of brazened on the labels. These peas are produced without.
That's what farmers are very cross about.
Yes.
But I think if I understand it, the perception from the supermarkets, the reason they don't is that they feel that if they put that on the label, then the consumer feels that they're paying more because it's sustainably produced.
And also, if they don't always source from just one supplier, I know this was the case in Jersey with tomatoes. All tomatoes used to be managed in Jersey using biological control, no pesticides, because most of it's indoor production, so it makes sense. But they could never say that in their marketing, because the people who source their tomatoes at some part of the year, they're buying tomatoes from somewhere else which doesn't do that. So they don't want to, because they're worried that the consumer will then lose faith in the supermarket by saying that at certain times of the year there's really environmentally clean tomatoes, and other times of the year the labels somehow disappear.
But this sort of says the complexity of the system, isn't it? That somehow within it, it's almost as if the system accepts that bog standard animal husbandry is a sort of necessary component of a regular and robust food supply system. That because we had this with the dairy industry, wasn't it? That milk production, that some rapidly. The moralising the environment book, I think, analysed, wasn't it? That some discharge into the rivers was an unfortunate product of efficient production.
Yes.
And that was the accepted norm. Then all of a sudden it changed, and farmers were up in court and being prosecuted by the NRA, etc. So, but we did it in a single sector.
Yes.
We don't get this idea that actually this is an ecological system that we're borrowing to produce food in most instances. That system needs to be whole. So even in our assurance schemes, you tend to have a focus on some
single issues,
some issues are more than others.
And there's no system thinking like that in the health economic paper, is there?
No.
I was saying, which is crazy.
Yes.
You do get it a little bit there in some corporate social responsibility thinking among people in the food sector. But I think it's very weak and it's not.
But the result is you're back to sort of George Pritty's argument about paying for it 3 times. So you pay for this, you give farmers, you give the support for your taxes and the CAP, and then pay for it at the supermarket.
Yeah.
and you pay to clean it up.
Yeah.
It wasn't done very efficiently. Or it was done very efficiently, so efficiently it damaged, caused environmental damage. And of course that's the true cost.
But there's an important difference in the language at the moment, because Michael was talking about competing at the top of the value chain rather than racing at the bottom. We're talking about gold standards rather than gold plating. And that's a very big difference, because gold plating in animal welfare was a big no-no. Don't do a gold plating, that's really bad. But now we're talking about gold standard, that's fantastic. So it's just focusing on the positives at a national level is a much improved language than before.
Are you worried it's just language, not action?
No, I think it's reaction. I'm convinced. I'm an optimist. Give the benefit of the doubt. Let's go for it. But I think it is opportunity. We have to get in there now and say what is possible now. That's the point. We definitely don't want to be sceptical and saying told us sort of.
I think what really struck me is the methodology, because I did my PhD. Finishing my PhD in interpersonal resilience, and I had to go down in Israel and the West Bank and try to get people to tell me about their relationships, where they're in conflict, how they deal with it. So the mindset that he talked about, this mantra, was essential. That was actually what I've used this mindset to go in the field and get people to engage and build the trust. And it works really well because the relationship is ongoing, and the trust is established. It's of course, it's always a two-way relationship. And it struck me how it was the same thing. And priming the person you're talking to is so essential. Sometimes we think that this language, the way we communicate, doesn't mean much. It's just, but it can change from 180 degrees the situation. Yeah, that was really pleasing.
It's the motivational interviewing then. Who did you use? Who did it? Was it professional advisors or?
So the project grant was written for vets and farm assurance assessors actually, and unfortunately we couldn't get through the politics of farm assurance assessors to include them. They could, and there's no doubt about it, they could, but it was a step too far. They will do it one day. but so we're working with vets, and the vets. So Alison's run several training programs, and some nice baseline stuff. And the baseline stuff with role playing actually showed that they have got a very nice and polite, but still it is a top-down knowledge-giving approach. Whereas they definitely responded to the training. And she's got nice pre and post recordings of consultations that farmers have had, and it's showing a real uptake of advice. And we couldn't persuade them to do 2 days, so we did 2 sort of evening meetings. So it is doable, and the vets really respond to it. They do get it, and I think it's a generation thing too, because a lot of the younger vets get communication skills and stuff anyway, so it's building upon rather than completely confronting. So I'm really enthusiastic about it as an approach. I think it works with all advisory groups, as long as they understand what its application. So it's not necessarily if they're asking if a farmer asks for a particular technical solutions, you don't need to worry about it. But when farmers are ambivalent, then